It's so lovely to be back, and it feels very strong, but very strong for me saluting that shrine again, which is just the sign of things returning and starting up and happening. So, as you well know, the theme is living the Dharma life. I think I'm quite excited about doing this. So I've planned what might be too much for this evening. I'm going to see how it goes. Actually, when I tell you, you'll probably say, it's too much. So what I'm planning to do is, I don't want to talk a lot about my own personal experience, but actually, when I started to think about this for myself, I thought, well, actually, I could divide my Dharma life into 4 distinct phases, and that hadn't consciously occurred to me before. So what I'd like to do is share something about those 4 phases, because it just gives a sense of the flow of the life, and actually is, in some cases, quite contrasting experience within, well, a consistency of practicing the Dharma, but quite different aspects of my life. So I'll talk about that. I'll open it up. I won't be covering everything. I won't be able to include everything that happened in the phase, but I'll give a flavour of it. It's kind of impressionistic, really. And then I have a short verse in the Theragata, which I love, which is really advice, I think, about how to live a Dharma life. So I'd like to be able to get on to look at that as well, and just say a little bit about the history of that kind of teaching. So that's the vision. And then after the tea break, we will also meditate. So that's the vision of the evening, and we'll see how it goes. And I always have to write lots of things down, so I don't necessarily use them. So a bit of background before we enter phase 1 of my Dharma life. And for this, do sit in any comfortable position, because this is a storytelling rather than meditation. But you could imagine a little girl in a Norfolk garden in the middle of nowhere in the 1950s, running around the garden, plaits streaming out behind her, waving a sword, and enchanted in her own imaginary world. And you guess that was me. So I had a distinctly solitary childhood. I didn't go to school till I was 7 because we lived in a remote place, and I played occasionally with other children before then. And then I had a life which was strongly influenced by or what I read, or the stories that I was told. I love stories, I love famous paintings, and I loved living out my own versions of those stories. And actually aspects of my personality still resemble that. We'll come back to that. And I lived in a loving, stable family. But conditions were developing. Some of them may have been within me already, introverted, always needing, I think, to have some part of my time where I define my own time and my own space, or ways of being for me in time and space, not necessarily confident with others, whilst also valuing company and a rich, imaginative life. Okay, so let's leap on to 1987, and the heading for this phase is the spiritual and the professional. So I'd lived alone for about 6 years. I was in Colchester. I met the Dharma at Norwich Buddhist Centre before any Triratna or FWBO activity started in Colchester. And I met the Dharma in Norwich, and away I just kept going. I kept going, and I've been keeping going ever since. So there was a more pioneering situation. The teaching was of the quality that we do it now, but there was excitement about it. And without even very strong meditation experience, I knew I was really responding to something deeply serious for me. And things started in Colchester, and because it was all very near the beginning, quite soon I was strongly involved. I was helping to lead things. I was helping to lead things for women. But simultaneously, remarkably simultaneously, professionally, I was head of English at a Colchester Comprehensive. Colchester then reorganised to open up a new 6th form college. I got a job there which took me into senior management. And that was also pioneering, exciting, very good people, very ethical, and a real sort of sense of the educational possibilities. So 1987 was a key year. College opened, and I also went to Taraloka for the first time in 1987. And actually, I've been going to Taraloka ever since, since then. And I think I've probably done over 100 retreats at Taraloka by now. Yeah, I'll return to that. And then things moved on. Professionally, I was promoted. I became vice principal in 1990, responsibility for both staff welfare and for student welfare. And I asked for ordination. And when I remember posting the letter I wrote, I remember what I wrote, because in Colchester, I was very isolated from many other Dharmacharanis. The nearest Dharmacharani was 60 miles away, and it was just me. So it wasn't very clear from that point of view if I could be ordained. And also for me, I was in a more outlying situation. I had Taraloka, but I was in a more outlying situation. I didn't know how long it would take. And I remember writing a letter just saying, well, I will wait. And if it takes 20 years or longer, I will wait. And well, actually, I was ordained in 1995. But, there was a vision there about the significance of all of this in my life. And that ordination was supported a lot by the Dharmacharanis, the more experienced Dharmacharanis, sometimes on this side of the country, who took me on, who supported me, who came to visit me, and who are still my friends in the order. So I was ordained in 1995 at Taraloka, just after it had opened. I'd never been there before, and I moved into a very active life. I was obviously leading more at the centre. I started supporting and then leading retreats at Taraloka. Excuse me. I was Women's Mitra Convener for 12 years, which I think is something of a record. And I had this very demanding job as well. And I'm impressed when I remember it, because I would do a very full working day, and I might meet somebody from the Sangha for supper and then go along to the centre and lead something or be part of a class and so on. So it was a very active, significant time in my life. Yeah, and then I decided to give up work. So it moves on to phase 2. So in 1992, I gave up my job, while saying I actually thought it was one of the most attractive teaching jobs in the country. I think that was the case. And I'm not at all adventurous normally, but I did this. I gave up my job without having a clear sense of what I was going to do. I was going to have a year off, and I hoped I could move to Cambridge, maybe work at the centre, hopefully live in a community. But there was the vision there of what I would like to do, and I did it, and left knowing that I had a very good life as a teacher and as a senior manager, left with a lot of appreciation of that. But the heading to phase 2 is isolation and being a carer. So what I could have foreseen and didn't foresee was what would happen with my parents. So my father, about a year later, died of cancer. And my mother had dementia, which was developing and which would become worse. So in another sense, it was very, very good that I'd given up my job and I could actually be strongly involved with her, not full-time, but living with her a lot of the time, alternating with carers, and then finding a home for her, which was a bad home, and finding a home for her, which was a really good home. And it was well, it was a very demanding part of my life, actually. People said to me, particularly after, they said, well, you did look sort of quite worn down during that period. And also I was trying to keep my active Dharma life going. So, I come back to Colchester from Norwich with my parents and lead Mitra study every other week and so on. And the sort of commitment to those things, and I would have been better actually just looking after myself. But also what struck me, particularly when I went the first time, and I went at very short notice, was that suddenly I was somewhere living without Dharma books, having to sort out when I might find time to meditate, at a distance from my spiritual friends, and particularly missing my chapter. So and even though my parents' home was in many ways very conducive. I had a shrine in my bedroom there. My mum had been to Norwich Centre, but still it suddenly hit me that all those objective resources weren't there anymore. And yet in another way, of course, I was meeting the significance of old age, sickness and death, and those deep Dharma truths about how life is. And it was a hard time. It was made easier by the fact that my mum was a very good woman, and she was still very ethical, and she was still very kind. And there was love there. There was love there as well. So there's a lot that I value from that time, and being able to be with her during that period. But it was so different to how I had been living before. I cleared the family home, 11 days in December, clearing out all the objects, well, going back to my childhood, to a world which was changing, vanishing, sold the house. So there was contact with the truths of life and finding my supports for that, but also a very different situation to what I had been in before. So that comes towards the end of that phase. At the very end, after my mother had died, I went on pilgrimage to India, which was a challenge in many ways, but also was very significant in deepening my contact with the historical Buddha, and I still benefit from that. And again, stepping into a different kind of experience. So 2008 to 2017, Taraloka. So my love of Taraloka had developed over all those years. As a teacher, I went very regularly in holidays, and I took on more leading there as well, as I've said. And Taraloka was then, and even more so in a way for me now, it's the place that it is, and it's somehow for me, it's also a kind of visionary space as well, which I hold, I think, in my imagination, and is harder to explain. But I moved there, I was accepted, I was welcomed, and I was stepping into Bante's vision of community, right livelihood work, centre activity, and explicitly a very full Dharma life. And I treasure those years, treasure them a lot. I mean, they also have their challenges, and they certainly challenged my introversion and my wish to have my own time and my own space, although I still managed to find it to some extent as well. But I was placing myself not only in something where I could serve, and the sense of service is very important, but also somewhere where I could grow and change. And in that situation, I was going to say there's no hiding place. It's slightly dramatic, or there's a much smaller hiding place, perhaps. You are seeing more, and also because of that, you see yourself more as well. So it was very helpful. It was a rich time. It had its ups and its downs, but I think I always felt a deep love and fundamental continuing happiness about being there in what is a very, very special place. And I'm always proud about the people that I've lived with. In the old days, when there were more communities and fewer order members, you'd hear people saying, oh, I lived with so-and-so, I lived with so-and-so. So I'm really proud that I lived with Parami, and I lived with Sadanandi, and I lived with Maitri Siddhi and Hridaya Gita, and I lived with quite a few other women as well, and treasure those memories, treasured our shared history. I became chair for 2 years, my last 2 years there, not with a wish or a vision of being a long-term chair, because by then I knew that at some point I was going to have to settle my own life for the future. But I became chair so that Sadanandi could go to Adhisthana, stop being chair at Taraloka, and take on what became the responsibility of being chair there. So I think, in a way, that was another act of service, although it was enjoyable and interesting and important in itself. So I'm doing quite well, time-wise. I'm not exactly treasuring time and space at the moment, but anyway, so 2017 onwards, Shrewsbury. I've entitled it A Home and a Way of Life. So I had again a kind of transition event. I left Taraloka, rented a house, and then went off to support the women's ordination retreat at Akashvana for 3 months. So I went to our ordination retreat center, remote in the Spanish mountains, to be there with women who are being ordained and to be teaching and helping with the whole practical running of the retreat. And it was it was a really, really good experience, actually. And it was on the one hand, it was a bit basic, but also comfortable, because you've been there, haven't you? You're on one of those retreats, yeah. And you're just at the heart of the ordination process, and 3 months gives all the right time for that to unfold and happen. But carrying on with Shrewsbury, I think it's been a blessing in different ways. I rented a house just at the point when I thought I was going to have to stop looking only in Castle Fields. And then I found 3 Victoria Terrace, Castle Fields, SY1. And that house has been such a blessing to me. It's a place for rich practice. It has an atmosphere, a strong atmosphere, I think a developing atmosphere, although the agents, one of the people at the estate agents said to me, oh, we really like that house. We really like that house. We think it's got a good atmosphere. And that was before I'd actually moved in. But it's deepened over time. And I think also deepened through doing retreats on Zoom, because on Zoom, I move around the house more, and my computer's in a different room, at the shrine in a different room. The practice, I think, flows into every space. On a level of convenience, it's incredibly close to the shop. So it's not even closer to the pub, but that's not relevant for me. And it is very quiet, very, very quiet. It's in a terrace, it's very quiet. And it's very close to a very good Buddhist center. Yeah. So all of that, I think, has just flowed very favorably and could have been otherwise. Yeah, and it's very nice to be back here. I haven't been very active around classes since lockdown, but I have still been active, meeting people, going to cooler meetings, doing quite a lot of other things, going to my chapter. And I do feel a lot of gratitude, actually, for this centre. Well, we have many, many really good Buddhist centres, but this centre is very, very well run and very capably run, and people give themselves to it very generously. And I feel very, very appreciative of that. my life is actually still quite a lot of wider activity and responsibility. It's not that I'm actually doing less in particular. So, well, I've just returned from leading the first, sorry, start again. I've just returned from leading the second retreat that I've led at Taraloka since we've been able to have retreats in person. So that was in June and in July. So I'm an active retreat leader still very involved there. I'm also a trustee of all 3 women's retreat centres, and I'm a private preceptor. And in May, I conducted my 5th ordination. And being a private preceptor draws you into other things actually around what's happening in the order as well. So I think I'm still fulfilling, well, my spiritual and imaginative vision around leading. The last retreat, which finished very recently, which we felt was a very significant retreat at Taraloka, was a retreat for women who'd asked for ordination about ritual and the imagination. And going into, I think, exploring this in a retreat context in a way that doesn't very often happen. And the interest in ritual and devotion is how I now express the imaginative excitement which I had in childhood. And when I really met the Dharma and the Dharma unfolded for me, I thought, yes, that imaginative vision, studying English literature, teaching English, putting on plays, all of it has kind of led to this. And this is the coming home of my imaginative life. And I still reflect on myself and my personality and my wish to grow and change and continue to put in the work at what level is required. I'm still very appreciative of my spiritual friends over the years and here and now. So I could finish really, I'm in the right place and I'm very appreciative of being here. Yeah. So I'm losing my voice bits. It's sometimes when I have a day when I don't talk to people. And I have just helped to lead a retreat and I could talk to people, but sometimes I find my voice goes a bit in when I do that. Okay. So that was just kind of setting the scene. It gives you, some of you, a chance to know more about me as well, and also just suggesting the variety of our spiritual life, that we can always be practicing the Dharma, always practicing the Dharma, and the unexpectedness of it, and the good fortune of it as well, and ultimately the preciousness, the utter preciousness of having the Dharma in our lives. Okay.
Are you open to any questions? Or is time short?
Well, it's not nearly as short as I thought it would be. Just transcending time and space. Yes, but not too long actually, because maybe just 1 or 2.
Yeah.
Okay, just 1 or 2.
I was just curious, when you started your first phase, what made you walk into the Norwich Buddhist Centre? What took you to the Buddhist Centre? Where did the journey begin in terms of your Dharma life?
Well, that's a really good question, because it began with good fortune. I'd been brought up as a Catholic and then stopped practicing. And I think when I was at university, I tried to teach myself to meditate, but nothing happened. And then cooking my supper in 1986, I heard a talk on Woman's Art about women who meditated. And I thought, I'm going to learn to meditate this summer. Couldn't find anything in Colchester. Well, I think there was. I couldn't find anything in Colchester. And then this very strange coincidence that my parents lived in this village outside Norwich, and in the house next door to them, 2 successive married couples of Western Buddhist order members had lived. So there were Taraloka and Padmavati and Jayamati and somebody whose name I can't quite bring to mind at the moment. And there was another couple somewhere else in the village as well. So unlikely, and I think they're probably under 40 in total dharmacharis in the world at that time, and 2 of them had lived next door. And my mum was a good neighbour, and so she knew them, she was friendly with them, and so she said, oh, why don't you go to Norwich Buddhist Centre? So I went to learn to meditate. I didn't go with any interest in Buddhism and was remarkably unaware, actually, of Buddhism. Yeah.
Can you say something more about finding rituals, your imaginative home, coming from the stories and literature, and then how that is encompassed in ritual?
Well, ritual is a very aesthetic expression of the Dharma and a very active expression of the Dharma. And you can liken it to theatre, although obviously it's got an even deeper impulse behind it. So I had a stage when I was teaching, I directed plays quite a lot and loved doing that. And they hold meaning and significance, and they're collective. And then coming to the Dharma, I don't know if I recognize this straight away, but suddenly, oh yes, there was the same means of expression available as well. And I think it's really, really important because it is very fully embodied. It's body, speech, and mind, basically, and can take us into more subtle levels of experience. And so there are differences with theatre and there are similarities with theatre. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Can you say something more, unless somebody else had another question, about how the Dharma helped at the time when you were looking after your mum?
Well, I think it kept, I did find opportunities to meditate actually when I was there, when I settled into my routine, and so those states of being helped, and the calmness around it helped. As I said, her personality helped as well. And I suppose a perspective on old age, sickness and death, you know, and the inevitability of it. And then just wishing to be kind. Yeah. Okay. So I wonder if your minds could just leap to another expression of the Dharma, really related to this piece of paper that I've put out by your sheet. Because having talked about my Dharma life, I wanted to share a particular reading that I really like, and we'll read it in a moment. You don't need to read it now. I'll give you the background to this and then we'll read it. Because also when I saw this theme, what interested me was the qualities needed to live the Dharma life, which kind of relates to your question as well, the qualities needed to live the Dharma life. And I have this particular teaching from the Theragata, come on to that, which sort of came my way almost by accident. I was on a day event where there were different readings put on in a bowl on the shrine, and he picked out a reading, and that was the one for you. And this one has been the one for me for about 20 years or something. And I like where it came from as well. So the Theragata is this, and this is Theragata. These are the male followers of the Buddha, the bhikkhus, who chose to live in solitude, at least parts of their life, who turned very much to nature, lived very, very closely with their environment, and meditated intensely and practiced devotion. You know, so they were the sort of wanderers and the hermits and so on, if you like. And they were living the Dharma life in India at the time of the Buddha in that way. And many of them were enlightened. They often lived in rocky, mountainous conditions, which were wild, which were challenging. Some of them, those conditions could be very beautiful. Lakes of lotuses, the cries of peacocks. And they were very intimate with nature. And I was thinking about this because in that world of that time, I could experience, I'm sure, an intimacy of with nature which isn't accessible to us anymore, and a sort of mystery and a wonder, and nature itself was free to flourish in a way which is much more rare now. And they lived in this relationship, this connectedness, this interconnectedness, and that was part of their practice. But what's really interesting is that they sang. They sang their spiritual experience. And the Buddha also did this, the Udana, where the Buddha was teaching so intensely that the impulse was actually to sing it, not just say it. And sometimes if you read suttas, there's a little bit of verse at the end, and that is where the Buddha burst into song, as it were. And you can reflect about how this was happening, how moved they must have been, the depth of experience they were drawing on. It wasn't just enough to speak it. And it would have been a particular kind of singing, not necessarily a good tune. And I think this is common to other religious traditions as well. There's something magical, and it's the single unaccompanied voice. Here, the single unaccompanied male voice. And Mrs. Rhys-Davids, who did a lot of compiling of these songs, and also the female Theragata as well, but she says of the men's songs, at their best, they have the qualities of a poem by Keats or a poem by Shelley. And she calls them word music. Word music. And I'll just say a little bit about the women, because I haven't chosen a song by the women, by the Terrys, so that's an I rather than an A in the middle, because the situation of women was so different. They couldn't go and live freely in nature. It wasn't safe. They couldn't live in viharas together because it wasn't safe. Many were in very oppressive marriages or just caught up in the whole cycle of birth, child mortality, and so on. And sometimes, I think Mrs. Rhys-Davids calls it serfdom, the way that they were treated. Not always, and there were queens and there were women in other situations. But when they sang songs about their personal liberation when they met the Buddha. When I was preparing this, I thought it was a little bit like much more contemporary Black women singing about coming out of slavery. It's soul music, actually. Not always so lyrical, but there's a real depth of experience there. So, but today I'm staying with the song of one of the male followers. So I've just got an example here. Very rarely do the women write about nature. And there's one which is something like I sit upon this rock, oh bliss. Because you just got there for a little while. I mean, the movement, we could think about songs of this kind, I think, more, and that would be interesting. And we have mantras are quite different, come from quite a different tradition, the spiritual profundity, and sometimes we think, oh, we don't think some sort of people compose mantras, but actually what they're really doing, I think, is composing songs. But it can be songs of this kind. And this one is an exhortation to practice. It's not, I could read you an example of one about nature, but this is actually an exhortation to practice. It's really good advice about how to live the Dharma life, wherever you are. And so my own feeling when I read it is it's quite tender. It's a bit like saying, oh, you can do this, and if you do, this will happen. I think my voice will hold for this. I think I will read it to you. And then how are we doing? Yes, and I'd like to say a little bit about it as well. So you've got two things here. You've got from the Theragata, and also at the bottom, I just put something directly from the teaching of the Buddha, just to show how there was a consistency here. So I was drawing your attention to the fact that the Buddha in the Chatakila Sutta says that when we're making significant spiritual progress, when we're doing that, the mind inclines to ardor, devotion, perseverance, and striving. And then we can see what this one says. Be loving, be kind, and follow the ways of goodness, committed and longing for the goal. Always keep going with courage. To dally and delay will not help you, but to be ardent is sure and safe. When you see it, cultivate the path, so you'll touch and make your own the deathless way. Okay, so I'll say just a little bit about that. It's quite simple. It's good advice. It's not obscure. And it starts, be loving, be kind, and follow the ways of goodness. So it starts with positive emotion, the sense of, oh yes, you can do this, be loving. So it begins with opening the heart. Or you can be loving in different ways and on different levels, I think. So be loving, yes, to other people, to yourself, be loving perhaps to nature, and be loving to the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas and the transcendental. So opening the heart and also being kind. So the spirit of the Metabhavana, the spirit of loving kindness. And follow the ways of goodness. And I think we perhaps don't talk about goodness very much. We talk about skillfulness. And we're obviously in the area here of ethics, the precepts, but follow the ways of goodness is a good phrase for it. And sometimes I like to say of something, someone might say to me, well, why did you do that? And sometimes I can just say, well, it was a good thing to do. And it takes out the personal. It was a good thing to do. And it's just an objective truth about that act. And I was thinking, one could get up in the morning and think, oh no, what goodness could I do today? Or at the end of the evening, one could think, what goodness have I done today? What good things have I done? So things can be a good thing to do, and we can follow the ways of goodness and honor that. Committed and longing for the goal. So committed, yes, of course, because we have to be committed. We have to be committed to what we're doing and single-hearted to make progress. We have to dwell with the ups and downs and the disappointments and the not feeling good enough, and also the richness and confidence and faith, and stay with it. But you also have longing for the goal. And that word longing, it's an active verb, as loving was an active verb. And longing, it's a beautiful word, I think. It's one of the aspects traditionally of faith. So when we long, well, something has touched us. Otherwise we wouldn't know what, we wouldn't have an object for our longing. Something in some way, at some level, has touched us, stirred us, affected us. And in terms of the Dharma life, that is a vision of the path or the transcendental, or a particular figure, particular teaching, but it touches something in us which makes us wish to move towards it, to go beyond, to go deeper. And it's like a transcendence of craving, actually. Craving, you want things for yourself. Longing, you have a vision of what is beyond yourself, and you wish to, well, kind of unite yourself with it, take yourself towards it. So it's a very lovely word, I think, and it's a beautiful human impulse. So longing for the goal, and always keep going with courage. And we do need courage to follow the spiritual path. And for all of us, actually, it's courage, because we're working with, well, the nature of the world around us quite often, and we keep going, and also the tendencies within ourselves, which we've inherited, which are just there, which are part of the human condition. So we keep going, but we keep going with courage, and courage is a fine quality, and it suggests virya, it suggests balanced energy. So to dally and delay will not help you. Good phrases. And also being committed is simple. Dallying and delaying, prevaricating, thinking, well, I'll leave it for longer, I'll do that later, I'll take this more seriously, or I've just done that. That is complicated. And it's not taking account of the uncertainty of life. Because we have opportunities now. We're sitting in Shrewsbury Centre now, and that's wonderful. But you can't be confident that your Buddhist centre might not be closed for 2 years. You can't be confident that you can go somewhere and chant loudly. You can't be confident that we'll be living in a stable environment in 15 years' time. We can't be confident of those things, but we can be confident of the Dharma. So dallying and delaying are not a good idea, although we probably all do it from time to time. And then, but to be ardent is sure and safe. I think ardent is a really interesting word. And the Buddha often encouraged his followers to be ardent and resolute, and to have that balance. And we don't use the word ardent or ardour very much. And I was thinking about this in relationship to Amitabha recently, because I just ordained somebody who has a close connection with Amitabha. And Amitabha is associated with the purification of passion, the purification of raga. And it's as though, I think, when you're purified in that way, you can then become ardent. It's like a very pure flame. And I think it expresses itself in different ways, actually. You can be fired up, but also it can be something quite tender. But there's that, hard to find another word for it, but there's that sort of richness of appreciation and engagement. So to be ardent, it goes with being committed, but it's the emotional, that sort of energized side of that person. You're ardent, you're ardent. So I think it's a lovely word. And then finally, when you see it, cultivate the path, so you'll touch and make your own the deathless way. So when you see the path, cultivate it. Cultivate's a good word. It suggests sort of planting seeds, nourishing, growing, letting something flower and flourish. And also it's quite a refined word when you cultivate something. So you cultivate the path. And you will touch and make your own the deathless way. And interesting, what would it mean to touch the deathless way? And I guess that's that, well, a significant experience or deepening of understanding, a sort of yes moment, which means that the momentum is to make your own the deathless way. You've touched something, or something has touched you. And you might know that life is different, or life will never be the same. Okay, so that's what that passage about qualities of living the Dharma life meant to me. It may speak to you in different ways.